My name's Sue White. I head up the marketing for SDN-NFV at Netcracker. So one of the things we know about NFV, SDN-NFV, it's all about creating new services. And I don't think we even know what those new services are. I think if we look at what's been done in the market today, it's very much centered around transitioning the existing services like managed security or Vaulty to a virtualized environment. So obviously you're going to save, we're going to have a lot of operational efficiency, faster time to market, but we still haven't really got to what those new services are going to be. And we will. When the architecture is in place for SDN-NFV, we'll start to see a lot more innovation come. So one thing that's really key is that going forward, all the services will be really driven from some kind of easy-to-use portal. We'll be able to click on a service, and when we click on that service, it'll just self-activate, and everything we've spoken about in the last few days will be automating that service. And you've heard a lot of talks about how we do that service automation, still a lot of work going on in that area. But what I want to cover in this presentation is stepping back and saying, well, how do we actually build those services? How do we get them into what we call this digital marketplace or this storefront that you just literally point and click and customers just activate their services from? So that's the piece I want to go through. So if we actually look at, here's an example of a storefront. So basically in this, you can see VNF type services, managed cloud VPNs or firewall security type services. You've also got your cloud type services because, again, going forward, there's a lot of discussion on this. It's not about just VNF-based services, but bundling those with cloud-based services as well. So you've got the cloud-based services, Microsoft Office 365, and all the new SaaS applications that are out there. And then all the nice bundles that you can deliver from that. So over here, you've got your VNF-based services. And then on the right-hand side, you've got all your SaaS-based services or IoT services or anything else. And from this one portal, you just want to point and click and give all the offers, all the promotions from this place. So what's it really going to take to get to this? So it's basically 3 steps. So the first step is all about designing the service and creating the service. It's the onboarding piece. Still a lot of work to do in that area, but we'll walk through where we are with that piece right now. So from that, you'll actually have let's say a commercially viable service at that point. But then you've got to monetize the service. And what we mean by this is really how you integrate with the BSS. We can't ignore the fact that if you're going to monetize a service, you have to bill for it, you have to integrate with catalogs. I mean, this is the piece that not a lot of people are speaking about right now, but it has to be solved. So we'll walk through the different steps for how you can do that. And then finally, you want to have a more collaboration environment because the whole point of SDN-NFV is you're going to have a lot more partners in your network. And if you have a lot more partners, there's a lot of stakeholders, and all those stakeholders need to be able to talk together and get information that's relevant to them about the service. So if we walk through the first bit, how you create and design the service. First of all, what's key is that everybody today spends a lot of time talking about VNF onboarding. This is the critical bit. We have to get through this part. But the VNF onboarding is just a small part. It's just 15% of what it's going to take to make that service commercial. So we have to start looking at the rest of it. What does it mean to take that VNF, and what does it mean to create a service from it? So we'll walk through some of those steps, and that's the majority of the time. But then it's not just about service onboarding. It's about all the commercial agreements that you need to put in place. If you've got a lot more partners you're working with, you need to have commercial agreements, you need to have revenue share agreements, you need to have revenue settlement agreements, you need to do things like license management, which is completely different in the virtualized world than it was in the physical world, so we'll talk through that as well. Now, there are some standards. There are no standards for this right now. There are some standards bubbling up. There's communities bubbling up. There's different service provider vendor communities that are working towards fixing this, and it will get solved. It has to get solved because this piece absolutely has to be automated. So it will we'll get there. So I'm not going to spend any time on the VNF onboarding because I think this is pretty well understood. A vendor who has a VNF will come with a sort of VNF descriptor, if you like. The descriptor written in Tosca will describe everything it takes to run that VNF in an orchestration environment. So it'll have all the information it needs. So you run through instantiating it, doing the VNF lifecycle management part, the testing of it, and you end up with a pretty solid descriptor for that VNF. But what's really key is this one. It's what you do with it next, because a VNF isn't a service. It could be a service, but in general, a VNF is composed of many different pieces. It may be 2 or 3 components of that VNF that create the service, or more likely, you might have 6, 10, 20 VNFs that are involved in creating a service. So what is your service? You have to define which VNF components, which VNFs work together, and then how you define your KPIs for that service. What's it going to be? So that's the first step. The service design is a really critical step. And this is something that has to be implemented in new networks if you want to bring down the time it takes to deploy new services. This part is really critical. So once you've defined what your service is going to be, you now have to model it. You now have to basically interwork all the different piece parts together, understand the relationship between all those VNF components and how they work together. And you have to simulate it. You have to simulate it working in a real environment. So at this stage, you've not even got to your orchestrator. You haven't wasted time on going through intensive cycles of network and service orchestration. You're simulating an environment. You're making sure that you've made all the right assumptions. You understand what hardware requirements are. You understand the different attributes that will need to run this service. And if it's not right, you can fix those things immediately. And what you pop out of that is a really strong network service description. So this is something then that you can run into your orchestration environment and check that it's going to work properly. Again, you're not in a real environment. You're not in a real-time environment yet. This is all still in the labs. So then you get to your service deployment. You instantiate the service, not the VNF. You test it with a network orchestrator, more likely in addition a service orchestrator. If we're talking about virtual CPE or SD-WAN type services, you're going to have physical components as well as virtual components. So all these need to be tested in that environment. Then you need to do the lifecycle testing of the service, not the VNF anymore. And then you have to validate everything. And when you finish this, it's an iterative process because there's bound to be things that you find that you didn't realize at the beginning. You come back to the service design phase, and you have a constant iteration of design, integration, testing that gets you to this network service package. And when you get to this, this is now a software asset that you can populate in a library that's reusable in any service. You don't go back now and redesign this in the future. You can leverage this software asset, and you can add it as a component to another service, or you can modify it really easily, but you have a software asset now, and you don't have to run through all that process again. So having this library of software assets, again, is really key because it'll shrink that time it takes to deliver these new services and modify new services on the fly. So one thing I want to mention is the license management, because license management is very, very different in the virtualized world, if you like. Why? Because first of all, you're moving to different schemes for pricing. It's more pay-as-you-use type schemes. Of course, you have many options, including perpetual, but really, we're talking more pay-as-you-use. So that wasn't done before. You also want to support the auto-scaling and auto-descaling. Again, that's not something that happened in the physical world. You booked licenses, for something like Volti. You booked them a year, 18 months in advance. For NFV, no, we want to, have those automated. We want to scale up, scale down as the service takes off. You want to make sure that, if you've, made some error in your system and you haven't actually, your license is about to expire, it may bring down the whole service because this VNF with this particular license could be in any part of your network and it could literally bring your service down. So this is a critical thing. I mean, this is where Netcracker is spending a lot of time working. We're leading the standards for TM Forum and ETSI in this area. We have working solutions in the market right now, working with different VNF vendors where we're brokering between, different attributes, if you like, that come from the VNF vendors. But this is something that we need, the standards, again, needs to sort of finalize, and we need to come to an agreement on. So now I want to move to the stage 2. So the stage 2 is more about the BSS side. So how do you really monetize? How do you convert them into true commercial services that are all tied to the BSS environment in some shape or form? So first of all, from this survey that we did with the European Communication Group, which actually was a survey that was global, even though it was European, 20% are saying that they actually have their BSS ready for virtualization. That probably is a bit high. I question that maybe is a lot smaller than that. But even if that's true, we're saying 80% of service providers out there don't have a BSS environment that's ready for the virtualized services. That means no billing, no catalog, no this, no that. So there's three, if we look at the different options for what it means to integrate into BSS, there's basically three things. The first one is that you extend or you modify your existing BSS systems for virtualization. This is really, really painful. BSS systems were just not designed for SDN NFV. They weren't designed for cloud. It would just take, obviously this is an area we know well, and it would take an awful lot of effort to modify the current systems, a lot of expense, a lot of time. So option one, we don't recommend, and we don't really see customers going down that route. Option two is that you evolve your BSS, you evolve it for virtualization. Of course, every service provider is going to have to do this at some point. But you may not want to do it or tie it to the timing of your SDN and NFV services. So we do have a number of customers who've made that transition. They've modernized all or part of the BSS environment for virtualization. But most customers are not there yet, and they're not ready to make that transition. And if you don't, then the third option is where we're seeing a lot more activity with customers right now. So this third option is we call microservice plug and play. So this is basically where in the current BSS environment, there are lots of gaps, if you like, in terms of taking care of virtualization services. So you basically fill those gaps. So you create the tools that will just fill the gaps that are needed for these virtualized services. So you don't recreate an entire catalog. You recreate the parts that are needed to take care of the SDN and NFV services. Same for billing, same for the catalog, same for the other areas. So what you do then is you just interface that into the legacy environment, and you plug in the gaps, basically plug in the gaps that are needed. And what that means is you don't change anything. You don't change your BSS environment at all. You leave it as it is. You create these microservice plugins, and these microservice plugins are just something that will evolve into your next-gen BSS later on. So you just leverage those and grow and grow and grow in the future. So just maybe to give a little bit more color on that, legacy BSS at the top with all its various piece parts, what we're saying is these big hexagons are some of the BSS components you need to have for SDN and NFV that are not capable in the existing environment. So again, you don't recreate everything. You recreate a catalog that's specific for what you need for SDN and NFV. And then you plug that in with the little hexagons with an interface into the existing BSS environment, and it synchronizes with the legacy catalog. So you have, essentially you don't have one catalog, but you have a complete synchronization across your services. And eventually, these will grow. These will grow and be part of your next-gen environment. So going back to the original plan was how you populate that digital marketplace or that storefront. So now that you've got your VNFs that you've onboarded and you've created a service and you've got these software assets, now that you've found a way to integrate into your BSS environment so you can monetize them. So these are the last few steps that you need to do. First of all, you'll have, let's say, a centralized, unified product catalog. So all the services that you want to have in your storefront, whether they're VNF services or cloud services don't need to go through the onboarding process that the VNFs do. You basically need to link to them. You need to link to the Microsoft or Amazon or Google servers, but you don't need to go through the hefty onboarding process. But everything comes together in that catalog, whether it's a cloud service, whether it's a VNF service. You define all the products that you have, the offers that you have, the promotions that you want, the pricing that you want. So everything gets defined in that catalog. You point to Microsoft server, and they'll download all the information about their products that you're putting in the catalog. So it's a complete automated way of doing that. Then you'll update your partner management capability. So you'll have a partner management tool because you'll have loads of partners, and you need to have a lot of information about the onboarding process and the license management agreements and the commercial agreements with the partners. All that information will reside here. Then you're able to create that storefront. So for my customer, what does the storefront look like? What look and feel do I give it? How customized is it? So you actually create that storefront. And then once they've actually bought something, you'll be updating your subscriber management tool. So that takes us then to the last part, which was really more the collaboration environment. So this is a case where now that you've got, when you get your service up and running, you want to have all the stakeholders have some specific information about their part of the service. So in the service provider side, you want to give them more information on how the services are performing. Which VNFs in my network are giving me the best return? How are they actually performing in the network? What are they up all the time? Are they failing? Which ones can I rely on? Which ones are better for certain markets? So there's all sorts of data you can get that will really help to fine-tune your offer. And that will help you obviously to go back to that stage we talked of earlier, tweak and modify your service and make it more specific to the target market that you're looking for. So there's a lot of information you can get from the knowledge portal, but the partners want something similar. Obviously not the same view, but all the partners involved also want to be able to see their part of the VNF service. Say if there's a problem with any of the devices, you want to know that immediately. You want to get advanced information. If your software is performing really well and you want to be able to sell the next batch, you want to be able to change anything in the license structure. So all the information can be available for the partner as well. They can get their own view of the service as well. So in order to summarize, first of all, we want to move to, the market's moving to more portal-driven services. So we talk a lot about automating the service, when you actually click on a service and you want to activate that service and automate it through its whole life cycle. That's critical. But we also need to consider how you automate the process of actually populating those services in that storefront. And some of that can be done today, more will come over time, but that's what we need to move towards, to automate as much of that process as possible to actually populate those services and be able to churn out new services very quickly. Don't let BSS transformation hold you up. There's no need to worry about having to tie your BSS transformation to SDNFV services. Solutions exist where you can just leave that alone, get to it when you need to get to it, and just do some plug and play until you get there. And a strong ecosystem, of course, partners, more partners that you need to work with. So you need to have a strong ecosystem, where a lot of this upfront testing can be done in advance before you get into a commercial situation. Okay, thank you.
Out to the audience. So can you help us a second? You talked about license management.
Yep. Yeah.
And you mentioned the TM Forum, you mentioned Etsy. Can you give us a sense of where the status is and when you think we're making real progress?
Yeah, it's still fairly early days, but what's nice now with the TM Forum, they've, for example, created a lot of use cases to start building out the scenarios. So that's where there's a different approach. With Etsy, it's more on the technical Mano integration. And with TM Forum, it's saying, well, looking at it from quite a different perspective and going through different scenarios and sort of bulk, one is related to sort of bulk offerings from many partners. So I think they're working through that right now. There's a few aspects to it. One is helping vendors to align on a common licensing structure, because all of them write licensing parameters in a different way. A little bit like the VNF onboarding. Everybody does it in a different way. So, but we don't necessarily want to make that a criteria that, you all have to do it the same. I think the models we're adopting is you can have some flexibility, but you need some central licensing environment that will broker between that. And that's the sort of architecture we're working on right now and the piece parts of that architecture. So it's making progress. But I think it'll speed up because now we're getting to real NFV services with multiple partners. It'll speed up. Right now, some of them have only 1 or 2 partners, so it's not a big issue. But if you've got 5, 6, 7 partners and a virtualization service, that's a big issue to solve. So I think we'll see progress happening a lot quicker. Thank you.